This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
I've been a participant in some of the most insidious lies and witnessed to deeds that no crazed man can imagine. I spent years watching you from my lofty position to know that you were the one I could trust.
And why did you lie to me?
There still exist some secrets which should remain secret. Truths that people are just not ready to know.
Who are you to decide that?
The world's reaction to such knowledge would be far too dangerous.
Dangerous? You mean in the sense of outrage? Like the reaction to the Kennedy assassination, or MIAs, or radiation experiments on terminal patients. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Roswell, the Tuskegee experiments. Where will it end?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth! Get out!
Or what? You'll kill me?
Always remember, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies.
We have before us the opportunity to forge a new world order.
Yes, we can. If you think.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
The lies most convincingly hidden between two truths.
I guess it won't end.
No! I don't have time for this. This is about saving the future of humanity.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the crying in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I want you to get out right now. Go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm a human being. My life has value, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Shall not pass!
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I have to say it has been a very interesting week since our last show. Just to give you an indication, this is basically what's been going on inside of my head as well as on my Facebook page.
Round, flat, round, flat, round, flat, round. Columbo, the world she's flat. The world she's round. She's flat. Look, King, she's round like the apple. She's flat like the pancake. Pasta fazool. She's round, she's firm, she's fully packed. She's round like my head. She's flat like your head.
That's Bugs Bunny, Here We Go. I've definitely been hopping down many rabbit holes with that whole deal. One thing I can say for sure, the issue is not nearly as cut and dry as I would have thought about a week and a half ago. Things are likely to get worse after tonight's show. Oh well, hey, what can I say? We're just enjoying our quest for truth, right? Well, before we get started tonight, I do want to say this as I have researched some of the things that my guest last week had to say, and I found that a few things I definitely wanted to correct. He, and as a result, I as well, referred to the coast of Antarctica as having a 2-mile high wall of ice. I had never actually really looked into that at all before. I was just basically parroting what he said. But as I've gone back to research what he was talking about, I found that there's not anything that tall, at least not that I could find. 200-foot tall walls of ice, sure. Maybe a little bit taller, yeah. 2 miles high, no. At least not that I could find. The other thing was the 1959 Antarctic Multinational Treaty. From what I've seen, it still allows for scientific research, just not military occupation or exploitation. He was making it sound like nobody can go down there, and, everybody's blocked out. And it doesn't seem like that's entirely true. There are tours that you can do, and but although it does seem that those tours are extremely restricted, I'll say that. And of course, it's not to say that there's not clandestine military operations still going on down there. I mean, you know how things go with that. But at least from what I could tell, the primary nature of the treaty was not to allow anybody to stake a military claim down there. And I have been hearing stories of people trying to go down there and do various things apart from what the carefully guided tours might allow them to do. And from what I've seen, it doesn't usually work out too well for such people. So, there may be some truth to its restrictions. It just seemed that it was a lot more locked down, the way Mark was trying to portray it. Maybe I just need to dig deeper anyway. I just wanted to mention those potential corrections. Like I say, don't believe a thing I say or anybody else. Don't believe what anybody tells you. Always do your own research. And that may go for the content we'll be discussing tonight as well. We're going to be talking about some pretty interesting things tonight, I think. My guest is going to be Mr. Nick Redfern. Nick is the author of 31 books on UFOs, Bigfoot, lake monsters, the UFO crash at Roswell, Chupacabras, the Hollywood scandal, including Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, Celebrity Secrets, There's Something in the Woods, Contactees, Final Events, The Real Men in Black, The NASA Conspiracies, Science Fiction Secrets, On the Trail of the Saucer Spies, Strange Secrets, with fellow Texas-based researcher and author Ken Gerard, Monsters of Texas. I'm going to have to ask about that. That sounds really interesting. Nick has appeared on more than 70 TV shows, including Fox News, the BBC's Out of This World, the Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive, the History Channel's Monster Quest, America's Book of Secrets, Ancient Aliens and UFO Hunters, and National Geographic Channel's Paranatural, and MSNBC's Countdown with Keith Olbermann. Now, I first met Nick, I believe it was at the, I think it was the 54th annual UFO conference in New Jersey a little over a year ago. We were both scheduled to be speakers there, and I had seen his bio and picture and stuff on the website before Sheila and I got ready to go. And as soon as we boarded the plane, I recognized him, and it turned out our seating assignments were basically right across the aisle from one another, and we both recognized each other, and after talking for a few minutes, realized that we were practically neighbors. We live about 30 minutes away from each other, but I haven't really seen or talked to Nick since last year. It's been a while since we've chatted, so I'm excited to catch up. Nick, are you there, sir?
Hey, Rob. Yes, I am. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, man. So, what have you been up to since last we met on that plane in New Jersey at the conference?
Oh, a lot of sort of expeditions, investigating weird creatures, Bigfoot type things, and a lot of writing and lecturing, and I guess in that sense, not much has changed, really.
Yeah, it was about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. I was just surfing for something to watch on Netflix, and I saw Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Exposed, and I got about 5 minutes into it, and there you were. I was like, hey, that was... Oh,
yeah, that was that was filmed, I think it's about last May, something like that, April or May last year.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It must have been filmed either right before or right after the conference.
Yeah, I think it was actually like a couple of weeks afterwards, maybe a month at the most, something like that.
Very cool. All right, well, let's back up. You've got quite the bio there. 31 books. Wow, man. How do you find time to write 31 books?
Well, that's 31 books across like 20 years. So, it's not that bad, I guess. But it's not that, I don't find it that difficult, really. I mean, I like to sort of stick to regular hours. I like to do Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Then I switch off at night, switch off at weekends. So I just have a regular, normal life. I'm sort of very good at balancing, lecturing and writing and TV stuff, and then having a totally normal life, outside of that. And I enjoy that because it allows you to sort of switch off. And I think there's a danger that, you can become burned out if you do it 24/7, or at least that's how I sort of view it. And I just, I enjoy having a normal life as well as, the other stuff I do as well. So.
Yeah, right on. Well, you may have a normal life, but you sure do write and talk about abnormal things. So,
yeah, well, that's true.
How did you get started in cryptozoology and becoming an international recognized researcher and all this weird stuff?
Well, when I was about 6 years old, my parents took me on a week's holiday to Scotland, and while we were there, we spent a day at Loch Ness. And, if you're going to go to Scotland, pretty much everybody goes to Loch Ness.
Yeah.
And my dad told me the story of the Loch Ness Monster, and of course I was just about, like I said, 5 or 6 at the time, and at that age it was just sort of an exciting story. Wow, there's a monster in the loch, and it's sort of very simple. For that age, you just sort of take it in the simple terms. But then as I got a bit old, I never sort of forgot that trip to Loch Ness, and when I got to sort of 9 or 10, 11, something like that, I started reading books by people, like John Keel and Brad Steiger and Charles Berlitz, books on things like the Mothman and Ancient Mysteries and the Bermuda Triangle, and that kind of got me interested. And then as my teens progressed, began reading more and more books and subscribing to magazines. And then when I finished school, I actually wasn't the best student at school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I sort of didn't do well, in my tests and exams and things like that. And, so I was one of these sort of late starters, and I thought, well, I suppose late starters, I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wasn't, as I said, academically that good at school. But I got offered a job, actually just saw it advertised, and it was working on a magazine for teenagers called Zero. It was a newly launched magazine, and it was basically covering things like music, fashion, interviews with rock bands and things like that. And it kind of sounded a fun job, it sounded better than your average job. So I went along for the interview, and they said, well, don't matter if you didn't get qualifications in this or this, we'll just train you from the beginning. So I got the job. I did that for about 2 years, and they trained me in all aspects of journalism and interview techniques and how to write a review, that sort of thing, and really sort of threw me in the deep end in the world of journalism. And then I did a lot of regular journalism after that for a sort of 5 or 6 years. But in that time, I sort of thought, well, why not try and combine the background on the Zero magazine with the interest in paranormal and unsolved mysteries. And so that's what I did, and decided to combine the two, really.
What was your first book?
Well, the first book was called A Covert Agenda, and that came out in England in 1997. And that was a study of files that had surfaced on UFOs through the British Freedom of Information Act, in the same way that, a lot of material surfaced through the US Freedom of Information Act over here. The British government has a similar one, and around about 94, they started releasing a lot of their previously classified files. So I decided to write the book on a subject where, you always want to give readers something new, and nobody had ever written about the British government UFO files before. So I thought, that would make a good first book, and people enjoyed it, and it sort of sold well because I think it was a new angle. People just weren't aware that, there were all these thousands of pages of British government UFO files.
So that was sort of that must have come out about the same time as our X-Files then.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting you say that, because when the X-Files started, in the US. It was a huge, very popular show in the UK, and it actually prompted people, UFO researchers, to push the government, to sort of, well, do you really have an X-Files department? And questions were actually asked in the British Houses of Parliament, and that's one of the reasons that prompted the release of the files. But because the X-Files was so huge in the UK, publishers wanted, people to put books out, and a lot of new magazines surfaced on the newsstands, and from about 94 to about 98, 99, the UFO subject was huge in Britain. The books and magazines and TV documentaries all over the place.
Yeah, I had never seen the X-Files when it was actually running on TV. It was always on at a time slot. I was just never around it when it was on. But like everybody I knew who knew me, they were like, Rob, I can't believe you're not watching X-Files. I mean, like totally into this stuff. And, they all knew it was like right up my alley. I just never watched it, but I came to Texas in 2003 and, I didn't have much when I first came here. My sister mailed me season 1 of the X-Files, on a, box set DVD. And I watched the whole thing like in a weekend. I was like hooked instantly. And I don't know that I would have picked up on this watching it week to week, season to season, but watching it back to back over, a whole season in a weekend, I noticed patterns, like the way the show was structured. And what I found was there always sort of like the weird freaky thing happened first, opening title credits, first commercial break, come back to Act 1. And in Act 1, there's usually that 5-minute piece of exposition where Fox Mulder usually sets up the episode. Such and such a weird thing happens in such podunk town in Georgia, 1973 or whatever. And then they go on with the episode. And when I noticed the pattern, I thought, I wonder. So I started Googling the keywords on some of the exposition that Fox Mulder would give. And not always, but I'm going to say quite a number of times, I would find the real life stories that the X-Files were actually based on. And, so not only did you have the entertainment value of the TV show itself, but for me it just became a whole new adventure in research. Did you find the same thing, or what was your take?
No, you're right. One of the interesting things about the X-Files is that they actually did, or they were sort of inspired by real events. For example, the Roswell, the story of the Roswell UFO crash, 1947, that appeared in a lot of episodes. You had stories about the Chupacabra and so-called skinwalkers, these sort of creatures from Native American legend. And pretty much anything that had been the Jersey Devil, this strange creature from the New Jersey Pine Barrens, this old legend. And so, in other words, they actually did go out of their way to use, obviously it was a fictionalized show, but to use cases that were, real in terms of they were real places and real events. And of course, they also did a good job of sort of demonstrating how an agency like the FBI works, in terms of going out and doing investigations and sort of methodically putting things together. But what I liked about the X-Files was that, they also had quite a bit of humor in it as well.
Yeah.
And a good playoff between the two main characters. It wasn't all just sort of dark and paranoid. There were sort of lighter moments, and they kept the show fresh. I think the only criticism I would really have, and it's a criticism I have of a lot of shows, is that it just went on too long. It's like, I kind of view it as like when a band goes on too long, they need to retire and stop, It was like that. I think it was let down by the fact that, they could have peaked and stopped around about 98, something like that, but, David Duchovny had enough, which is fair enough, he wanted to get out, and then they brought in the new characters, and it just, I think, for me at least, the final word, if you like, should have just been the original two, not chopping and changing it and whatever. But it'll be interesting to see what they're going to do with the new series, now it's coming back, and, if it's going to carry on in terms of storylines, or are they even still going to be in the FBI, or are they just going to be civilians, doing it on their own? I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I mean, I usually don't really get my hopes up too much on reboots, but every now and then, I'm pretty impressed. Like the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, I thought was pretty cool. So who knows? Maybe. But in your bio, you mentioned collaborating with another Texas author about monsters of Texas. What's up with that?
Well, yeah, it's with a good friend of mine named Ken Gerhard. Ken lives down in San Antonio, and like me, Ken's interested in things like lake monsters, Bigfoot, strange creatures, that kind of thing. And I've known Ken probably about 11, 12 years, something like that. And we basically, at a conference, we thought about doing a book together. And, obviously in the internet age, it doesn't matter if he does one chapter and I do another, and he's in San Antonio and I'm in Dallas, it makes no difference.
Yeah.
You just put it together electronically. And so we decided, well, we both live in Texas, and I had sort of more resources on certain things like, certain creatures that we talked about in the book. And Ken had a lot of good resources on other ones, like from his perspective, Chupacabra reports and things like giant birds and Bigfoot-type creatures. And I was looking at it from some other angles, like paranormal-type angles in strange creatures in Texas. So we decided to basically put the book together and, write our own separate chapters. And if we could add to each other's chapters, that would be great. And pull all our photographs and really try and do like a comprehensive study of all the reports of weird creatures in Texas. And the book includes sort of unacknowledged animals like Bigfoot or the Chupacabra and lake monsters, but it also covers things where people have reported seeing things like mountain lions roaming around on the fringes of Dallas and things like that, and alligators in the sewers, legends similar to the ones from New York. And so, in other words, we try to cover strange animals and also out-of-place genuine animals, which, some of those stories were just as weird as well.
So do we have a Texas Bigfoot?
Yeah, there's actually, people think of Texas, they think desert, there's tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
Before I moved to the US, which was like 15 years ago, my impression of Texas was just from really watching like cowboy movies when I was a kid, I thought it was all cactuses and that kind of thing. But, as you know, from the Dallas part of Texas across towards Louisiana, it's like very heavily forested.
Yeah.
There's massive woodland, and not just going horizontally across, but all the way down, down towards like the Big Thicket and down to Houston that way, heavily forested. And the closer you get to Louisiana, that's kind of where we get more of like a proliferation of Bigfoot-type reports. And, they're pretty much similar to the more famous ones in the Pacific Northwest forest, like Washington State and places like that. Sometimes there's like a height difference. Sometimes they're not as bulky as, the sort of classic Bigfoot of, 8, 9 feet tall that you get from, as I said, Pacific Northwest. Sometimes they're sort of smaller and slimmer. But for the most part, they're sort of like a hairy humanoid creature. And what's interesting, you can actually go back to like some of the old Dallas newspapers from the 1870s, 1880s and find reports then, long before the term Bigfoot existed, but when they were talking about sightings of so-called hairy wild men. That's how they referred to them, sort of like 130, 140 years ago. But if you read the reports, it's clear they were talking about sightings of what today, people would call Bigfoot. So it's intriguing that, the skeptics often say, well, this is, why didn't we hear about Bigfoot before the last 40, 50 years? Well, the fact is we did. It's just the name didn't exist. And unless you go digging in a lot of old, obscure 140-year-old newspapers, you wouldn't know. But there are actually a lot of really good reports, and from Texas, of people seeing these type of creatures. The famous one, known as the Wild Man of the Navidad, and again, it's like an 1800s era case, and it's like a classic Bigfoot story that sort of rivals the ones we hear of today even.
Wow. Right here in Texas. So like in Tyler, heading from like Tyler east, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, the sort of Tyler, Jefferson, that sort of area. We get a lot of reports from those areas. And, you know, it would make sense if these creatures are sort of large, ape-like animals and they need cover and they need a good food supply and water. Well, sort of boggy areas where there's streams and creeks and rivers, that kind of thing, and there'd be sort of a large amount of wild animals to feed on, you know, smaller animals, that kind of thing, and also to hide. You've got those are sort of the perfect ingredients, and you know, and it makes sense that if they're going to exist somewhere in Texas, it's obviously not going to be like on the plains of Lubbock or Amarillo or somewhere. You know, that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
But certainly where, you know, there's massive forest land, which there, you know, as you know there is on the east side of Texas, I mean, it would be the ideal place, really.
Well, we got about a minute before we go to break. What do you think they are? What are they? Are they just an offshoot of man, or what's your take on them?
Well, there's several different theories, and I'm not sure they're all sort of independent of each other. I mean, you have the one idea of sort of primitive humanoids, you know, like an ape or an ape man, if you like, or a missing link. Then you've got the theory that it's some sort of unknown type of ape, you know, that just science has never classified before, sort of like a North American equivalent of a gorilla, but we don't know what it is. But then we also have the theory that is popular in some camps and not popular in others, that Bigfoot has like sort of supernatural overtones to it. Because there are some weird reports where people have said they've seen these creatures and they've sort of vanished in a flash of light, or they've sort of faded away. So there's a lot of weird stuff like that.
Okay, hold the thought. We'll come back and talk about that some more.
Okay. All right, cool.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight we're talking with Nick Redfern. And right before the break, we were discussing Bigfoot in Texas. Do you think there are maybe as many of these types of creatures out there as, say, black bear or other similar creatures in every state? Do you think they're like everywhere?
Well, that's a good question, because we do get reports from, you know, all across the U.S., from the West Coast to, you know, central parts of the country, like Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. You know, you get a lot of reports from the Florida Everglades as well, and of course the northern states, the closer you get to Canada, again, where there's like large forest land. Now, of course, the big question is, obviously, why don't we ever catch these things? I mean, obviously the skeptics would say, because how could you catch something that doesn't exist? You know, that's their point of view. Other people suggest, well, maybe there's some sort of phantom type creature, like a paranormal thing. That's why we don't catch them, which is an interesting theory. And in terms of the flesh and blood angle, I think the best answer I could come up with, if it's flesh and blood, is that there literally aren't that many of them. And perhaps unlike most other apes and monkeys, perhaps they're nomadic and solitary. You know, most apes and monkeys live in groups. They're very sort of communal and social creatures, like us, you know. But if Bigfoot is sort of more nomadic, then that might explain why it's difficult to catch these things. You know, unfortunately, that's why gorillas in the wild become so, you know, sort of dangerously in position of becoming extinct, is because hunters, unfortunately, know they live in groups and they know where to find them all the time. If these Bigfoot creatures are sort of on the move, solitary for the most part, and not living in static groups, that would make it much more difficult to find them.
Seems like in the last decade or two, there's been a lot more linking of Bigfoot to UFOs. Have you found that to be true? Do you think that there's a paranormal aspect to it, or?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, as I said, it's a theory, if you like, that has some merit to it, but it's one that sort of polarizes people in the field of the cryptozoology into the ones who think there's something to it, like me, and others who think, no, that Bigfoot is just a flesh and blood unknown type of ape that we haven't found yet. And of course, I mean, I enjoy a good heated argument as well as the next person, and you do get that in this field of like the whole paranormal aspect of Bigfoot. But I mean, the thing I always say is that even if there's only a small number of paranormal themed reports, then we should address them. Unfortunately, a lot of people say, well, the witnesses were either mistaken or they were hoaxing or fantasizing, whatever. But I don't think it's that easy to write off when there are literally hundreds of reports of people saying they saw Bigfoot in conjunction with strange lights in the sky, or, as I said earlier, that people have said they've seen these things literally sort of fade away or vanish in a flash of light. Or, that people have been following footprints in the snow and the prints have just come to an end as if the creature's just vanished. There's also reports of Bigfoot-type creatures almost sort of affecting the nervous system of people. Let's just say when people get too close to these things, they can almost sort of zap us and temporarily paralyze us and scramble our minds while they escape from the area. Now, as far as we know, at least, no regular apes can do that. There's never been a report of a gorilla disappearing in a flash of light. So why is it that, sort of out of every 100, there are a couple, handful of reports where people do report that? And I think, I've always said to people that the most important people in the subject are the witnesses. And if they're telling us this, then the responsibility is on us to investigate these cases, not ignore them because it might not fit well in somebody's belief system. We've got to address these anomalies, even if they don't sit well with the idea that it's not just, a flesh and blood ape or whatever.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said that. When I was talking about the top of the show last week, I did a whole show on flat Earth theory, which when you first hear it, your knee-jerk reaction is like, that's ridiculous. That's so stupid. I can't even believe anybody's talking about it in the 21st century. Which, to be honest, was my knee-jerk response to it as well. But it is true. Condemnation before investigation is the height of ignorance. And so I think you're right. I think whenever these things come up, it's worth the time to do the investigation. Now, if it is completely bogus, it'll manifest that usually pretty quickly. But like in the case of this flat Earth thing, what I found is after literally it's all I've been looking into for a week and a half. Like that's all I've been doing from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. And I'm finding, man, this is just not nearly as cut and dry as I previously would have thought it was. And I suspect it's probably the same with everything that you have looked at for the last 20-something years. It's not as cut and dry.
Well, yeah. I mean, I found there's enough data to suggest that Bigfoot exists, but I don't think there's enough data to say it's just an unknown ape. There are these anomalies, and and I think the problem is when people start dealing with belief systems and they don't like their belief systems questioned, they get defensive and arms get folded and voices get raised. It's what happens is that it becomes more about defending a belief system than it does actually looking at all the facts. And I don't pretend at all to know what Bigfoot is, but I absolutely do think these things exist because there's a high percentage of credible reports. Yeah. But I do sort of move towards these paranormal aspects. I think there's a legitimate aspect to it, but I don't pretend to understand what it is or why it is. Only that that's what people report, and so we've got to follow the path of what they're saying.
Yeah. What about crop circles? What's your take on crop circles? What do you think? What do you think's causing it? What do you think? Is there a message? What's the deal with crop circles?
Well, yeah, crop circles are interesting and controversial. I mean, I grew up in England, and so when the crop circle thing began in the 1980s, I followed it closely, and And through the 90s, I would often go down there in the summer months and just see the new formations. And they look impressive when you see them in a book or a magazine or a TV show. They're even more impressive when you actually get into them and you actually realize that the formation you're in is like 200 or 300 feet long. They're gigantic. You don't necessarily sort of get that appreciation from seeing them in the book. It's like you see them in a photograph. It's like, wow, that's really cool and intricately done, and it is. But it's when you actually stand in one and you think, oh my God, this is like football. This is like 2 football fields in size or whatever. It's just huge. What I find interesting about crop circles is that a lot of people don't know that reports of crop circles actually date back centuries. There's a famous case from England known as the mowing devil. If you Google the mowing devil, you'll see this old paint or drawing of this weird little goblin-type creature standing in a circular area of flattened ground in an English field. And this dates back from, I think it's like the 1600s. And during the Second World War, Britain's MI5, which is the British equivalent to the FBI, they investigated reports of crop circle formations found in fields in Europe. And they came up with this intriguing theory that they were coded patterns left by German spies for Nazi bomber pilots who would sort of see the messages as they flew overhead, and they would have like a key that would allow them to decode the formation to the message might be like bomb London at midnight, approach from the northeast, that kind of thing. Now, the theory was never proved, of course, but what's interesting is that we know from the official records that have been declassified that people were seeing crop circles long before the term crop circle existed, and even at the height of the Second World War. And the Germans thought we were making these formations as a coded message, and we thought the Germans were making them. So, in other words, there's a long history that goes back long before the whole thing in the 1980s and 90s. There are a number of different theories. I mean, I think the one theory that I don't believe, which is the one that at first glance a lot of people think would be the logical one, is that the ground is flattened by a UFO landed. It's not like that, because a lot of the patterns, if it was just circular patterns of ground, I guess you could say, well, yeah, a circular-shaped flying saucer is going to flatten the ground. But when you've got formations that are, designs that look like insects and writing and planets and things like this, then clearly that's not the imprint of a UFO. So we have to look at other scenarios, and the theory that kind of interests me, because a lot of the crop circles seem to sort of point messages and warnings to things like ecological destruction and the end of the world and that kind of thing. And one of the things that interests me is the whole sort of Gaia idea or scenario. The Gaia scenario is that the Earth itself is like some sort of intelligent living entity. It's not just the planet we live on. It actually is, like I said, like a living thing itself with some form of consciousness. And so the idea is that perhaps these crop circles are a manifestation of the Earth hitting back at us, the most destructive, creature on the planet, and essentially creating messages for us as a way to try and curb in, what we're doing. Now, on the other hand, there are a number of people who make crop circles, and they're doing very well. The media and also the UFO research field often just dismiss these people as hoaxers. But if, as I've done, you speak to the people who have made crop circles and have admitted to doing it, a friend of mine, Matthew Williams, is a very skilled crop circle maker. But what a lot of people don't know is that people like Matthew, and including Matthew, have said that they felt when they started making crop circles, they felt compelled, almost as if something was channeling, like a higher intelligence was channeling them to make these formations. So in other words, Matthew actually fully believes that the crop circles he was made, that essentially some sort of alien intelligence, whether extraterrestrial or something from here, something more stranger, actually sort of mainlined into his mind and wanted him to make these formations, possibly as a means to have people thinking about what they might mean. So in other words, you have genuinely mysterious formations, but even a lot of the people who make them, you know, they say, well, there's a paranormal component to what they do, and they feel drawn as if something's pulling their strings, so to speak, to become part of the phenomenon.
Why do you think they seem to center around the Wiltshire area?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting because, you know, the one thing more than any other, I mean, they're called crop circles because when they first began, you know, they were totally circular. Then they became more and more intricate. But what's equally interesting is that Wiltshire, which is a very ancient county in England, it's home to a number of ancient circles like Stonehenge or the Avebury Circle, which are both large stone circles, which date back thousands and thousands of years. And also within Wiltshire, there are some smaller stone circles as well. You know, people think of stone circles in the UK. They obviously think of Stonehenge, but there are actually hundreds of them. It's just Stonehenge is the biggest and the most famous. Some of them just have circumferences of like 10, 15 feet, and they're just, you know, 1 foot high stones. There are others where the stones are like 3 or 4 feet high, and they're in a circular formation of perhaps 30 feet, but they just don't get the publicity. But I do find it interesting that we have crop circles today in Wiltshire, and we have ancient stone circles, you know, dating back thousands of years. And I do sometimes wonder if it's all part of the same phenomenon, that ancient man sort of perhaps created these things, paying homage to something that came from, you know, the skies or whatever. But I mean, Wiltshire is sort of it's an unusual county. When you get it there, it's almost like going back in time. You know, the little villages and towns have changed for centuries, and it almost is sort of going back into like the 1800s in some of these little areas. A lot of magic and sort of mystical legends and folklore and belief systems still attached in a lot of these areas. So it's, I guess in that sense, it's sort of like appropriate because it is a very sort of magical place to visit almost.
And is that where the pictogram versions first showed up? You know, where it wasn't just so much a circle, but a stylized, you know, weird image.
Yeah, it actually is. The crop circles, as circles, really started sort of late 70s, early 80s, and they were, for the most part, they were just like a minor interest that caught the attention of people locally, and maybe very, very occasionally would make the national newspapers, the bigger ones. But it was really only sort of 89, 90 that things really began to take off massively. And that's when you had these huge, intricate, fantastic formations starting to appear. It was roughly sort of 88, 89, 90. It was like a crazy time then. And even, I mean, the BBC had teams out there at night, you know, scouring the fields, and the British Army were helped out to try and figure out what was going on with night scope equipment, that kind of thing. And it was major headline news, and that continued. But I think the main reason was because the formation suddenly jumped from being regular circles to being the most fantastic things you can imagine. Now, when people say, oh, it's all just people making them, it's very often the people who say that actually have never bothered to actually go out to these places and check them out. Yep. I mean, a lot of these formations appear in fields in the vicinity of like little tiny villages. Well, we're not talking about areas where, you know, like downtown Dallas, where there's street lights on 24/7 and millions of people. We're talking about out in the countryside where there might be a little village of 20 houses and a pub, you know, and a little church, that kind of thing. You know, like you see some of these old English movies. That's how they still are today. So in other words, it's pitch black. And so then you have to figure out, well, how are these guys making like a 300-foot perfectly symmetrical formation in pitch black darkness at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes even on sloping hills, not even on flat ground. So that really, for me, rules out the idea that it's just, you know, skilled people. There's something far more to it. But there's no doubt that it was the pictograms that really caught everybody's attention.
Yeah, were you there when that really big one, I think it was in 1990, that was made it on the cover of the Led Zeppelin album?
I actually wasn't there for that one, but I was there right through from after that, right through till 98. I pretty much went down every year for at least about sort of 3 or 4 days, because I didn't live that far away, just a couple of hours drive. And so probably about 5 or 6 years in a row, something like that, I would go down and just sort of get a bunch of photographs of the new ones and check them out and get pictures and speak to the locals. And what's interesting is that one of the aspects that started to crop up round about 92, something like that, was that people reporting seeing strange balls of light hovering and moving over the crop circles, both during the day and the night. We're not talking about sort of classic flying saucers or anything like that. They were sort of gleaming balls of light, anywhere from the size of literally like a golf ball up to a tennis ball or a little bit bigger, maybe even like the size of a soccer ball or slightly less. And they were extremely sort of reflective. I wouldn't say illuminated, like on fire, but highly reflective, like a reflective mirror, that kind of thing. And they seemed to be under intelligent control, or they were some sort of intelligent energy themselves. But they were often seen sort of racing across the fields and hovering over the crop circles, both day and night, and it's never really been explained as to what they are, and it's a component that, again, sort of takes it far away from the whole hoaxing angle, even.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard stories of people claiming to get healed or have other kind of strange experiences, or computers and watches and electrical things not working in them?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a number of people who felt kind of strange and rejuvenated and energized in crop circles, and I mean, I'll be the first. I don't know. Is it because of something to the crop circle, or is it like an expectation, and you suddenly feel energized because you expected it? I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of the two. But I know, for example, that dogs have acted in strange fashions in crop circles. Sometimes from like a positive perspective, where they suddenly get excited. Other times where they just don't want to enter it, which kind of makes you wonder if there's some sort of latent energy there that they can tap into. I mean, dogs have, obviously their senses are far keener than ours are. Yeah. And so maybe they're picking up on something. But yeah, I heard a number of stories of things like that, of people feeling energized, and people who are suffering from things like migraines and various, allergic conditions have actually felt much better after sort of sitting or laying in a crop circle for a couple of hours. So, there's obviously far more to this than just, it's just cool looking patterns on the ground. There's much more to be uncovered still.
That one that had what looked like an alien gray head and a disc that looked like it had...
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Is that legitimate?
Well, I guess it depends who you ask. People have said, well, they know who made this one, or they know who made that one, or they don't know who made this one, and you have competing people who claim to have made them, and obviously everybody can't be telling the truth if different people claim to have made, the same formations. But one of the things that interests me when, people say, well, who made this and who made that, is that what we very rarely find is when a really intricate formation has been made, but there's an error or a mistake in it, or it's been aborted, it's just been stopped because they realise that, they messed up. Now, people aren't perfect, we're all flawed in one way or another, and yet with the crop circles and the ones that turn up late at night, these highly intricate formations, it's rarely ever that there's a mistake made in the formation. So again, when people say, oh, well, I made this one, or they made this one, why is it that they just don't make the mistakes you would occasionally think they would at 3 a.m, where there's absolutely no street lights in the middle of a field in the English countryside? This is This is why I often take these claims that, well, we made it with a pinch of salt, because if they're going to do it, and they have done it, we know that some have been hoax, but when you talk about the really intricate ones, I always wonder why don't they actually film it at the time, and then we could see the evidence. Well, they rarely do that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of 3 o'clock, we got about 3 minutes to the break, but do you find that a lot of these happen in that 3:30 kind of witching hour time frame?
Yeah, they actually do. I mean, certainly in Wiltshire, when the crop circle season's at its height, people are out in the fields from early evening, and everybody just sort of finds a good place to relax, whether on the side of a hill and whatever, and chill out and just wait to see what happens, if they see any strange lights and whatever. And things usually do sort of kick in sort of 11, midnight onwards. But it really is sort of, I would say, the period from around about 2 a.m. to perhaps 3:30 when the weird, the really weird stuff starts to happen with the strange lights and, the idea that things are starting to sort of go down in terms of these formations being made and people hearing strange noises and electrical crackling in the sky, things like that. And it's not sort of usually 10, 11, 12, 1. It's sort of, whenever most people are sort of in deep sleep stage,
What do you think it is about that particular time of the night? I mean, so many things. It seems like a lot of things happen in that 3 o'clock time frame.
Well, I think, I think there is something to the idea that is the one time more than any other when all of us are in the deepest sleep state. I mean, you go to bed at night and you sort of have light sleep to begin with, and then you fall into this deep sleep state. And I think a lot of these paranormal events occur when people are in deep sleep states. It's almost as if, I think some of these paranormal phenomena, ghostly type, supernatural type things, I think they can actually interact with us in our sleep or dream state. I think they have a way of, in simple terms, invading our dream state, our minds, when we're essentially, at their mercy because we're in a deep sleep. And I think that's possibly why also some of these events occur in the early hours of the morning. Whether you're awake or not, you're not at your full alertness, and you're perhaps more susceptible to something actually being able to get its grips into you and manifesting before you. So I think that might have something to do with it.
Wow, that's really interesting. Have you seen the movie Dark City?
Yes, yeah.
They had this ability to walk by people and sleep, everybody sleeps, and then they rearrange everything, and change like the whole world while everybody's asleep. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good movie, Dark City. A lot of that's based on the legends of the Men in Black. Actually, the images of the guys in that was actually taken, from the inspired by the original Men in Black report. Nothing like Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. They're more like the real Men in Black are far more like the guys in Dark City.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're about ready to go to break right now, and I definitely want to address 3 things: Shadow People, Derby Hat Man, and the Men in Black. Yep. Back for the second hour of the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight we're talking with Nick Redfern. And right before the break, we were making mention of the movie Dark City, and I mentioned it last week when I was interviewing Mark Sargent with regard to the whole idea of the enclosed earth and how that was sort of portrayed in that movie. But he made a statement. He says, great movie, and I said, I don't want to go there. And I never really finished why I said that, but the reason I said that I enjoyed the movie too. I really liked it. But when it first came out, it freaked me out so bad because of the derby hat kind of dudes floating around in the movie. And the reason that freaked me out is because I've had experiences with what I call Derby Man and the shadow people. And actually kind of a funny story. My now ex-wife, was getting up for work the next day, and she went to work before I did. And I was laying on my side, on my left side, and the door was behind me. And it was a rainy day. And she had gotten ready for work and had a trench coat on and like a bucket hat that you might wear like at the beach, you know. And I'm laying on my side, and you get that feeling like somebody's watching you, you know. And I just kind of turned around real slow, and she's leaning in to kiss me goodbye as she's getting ready for work. And all I saw was this trench-coated derby-looking silhouette coming at me. And I pulled a Scooby-Doo and went to the bottom of the bed, you know, zoinks, you know, shaking at the bottom of the bed, screaming. And she's like, "Oh, you're a real good protector." And I felt like such a schmuck, but she didn't understand. I mean, we laugh about it, you know, we laughed about it quite a bit, but I was like seriously freaked out because that movie was a little bit too real for me. Because they did this whole thing with the sleep and, you know, they would rearrange everything and do weird stuff. And the reason it freaked me out is because for years I had experience with, shadow people, awaken, you know, or like they would, the sleep paralysis and strangling me and the whole deal. And I thought I was crazy for a while there until she actually saw it. She saw it on me one night and freaked out about it. And other people who were in that house, had experienced them as well. So, you know, it validated, okay, I'm not the only one, and other people. And I was writing a script. This was probably 1997-ish, I think, 97 to 99, somewhere in there. I was writing a script called The Shadow People, and I was listening to Art Bell on Coast to Coast, and he had Open Line Friday, and some guy somewhere in the country called in, you know, east of the Rockies or whatever, and said, "You know, Art, I'm having these weird experiences with, I don't know what else to call them, but shadow people." And as he says that, I'm looking at my screen with the title of my script, Shadow People, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you gotta be kidding me." And all of a sudden, Art Bell's phone lines just lit up. His board went like crazy. People calling in from all over the world, and I actually got through. I was one of the callers that got in, told my story as well, and Art was freaking out about it. Because it was, you know, it was the first time anybody had really talked about it that publicly. And he said, "You know what, we're really onto something here, so I'm going to have my webmaster create a section on the website. Everybody, whatever you believe you have seen, draw pictures of it and submit it to my webmaster, and we'll post it up on the website." So people from all over the world were drawing pictures of these shadow entities, and quite a few of them were drawing the picture of the derby hat guy. What is the deal with the shadow people and the derby hat guy?
Well, the names, I guess, if you like, are sort of interchangeable, but they're all pretty much an indication of the same phenomenon. And although, I guess, in terms of public awareness and research and things like that, you're right that most of the things sort of really kicked off or began to kick off in sort of the late 90s, that kind of era, and then certainly definitely picked up in the mid-2000s onwards. Excuse me. But you can find stories of these sort of Hatman type things, shadow people, actually going back decades and decades, and it's just that people haven't necessarily referred to them by name or them discussed them with other people, and so these stories get buried. But throughout history, certainly the 20th century, you can find reports of people who've sort of woken up in the middle of the night and they've seen like a shadowy, silhouetted figure. Sometimes it's a woman. You actually get women in black type cases, but more often than not, it's a man, and the outline is like a shadowy figure of a man in a suit, wearing like an old-style 1940s era, 50s era hat, that kind of thing. And because it's obviously in shadow, it's black. Sometimes witnesses describe them as having like illuminated eyes, sometimes glowing like a silver or a red color. And sometimes the shadow seems to take on like a semi-physical form. Sometimes it's just totally one-dimensional, like a regular shadow, but with no evidence of what's making the shadow. Other times it seems to become it takes on more of a 3D form. But what's interesting is that a lot of the weird Men in Black reports, the Men in Black wear these old-style hats as well. So I'm sort of inclined to think that the Hat Man, the Shadow People, the Men in Black, they're all sort of manifestations of the same phenomena. They're different aspects of the same phenomenon, and they have the ability to interact in different ways, and lots of different theories as to who they are or what they are.
Of course, I come from a Judeo-Christian background, so for me, it goes to the demonic type realm, because any time that I've ever encountered them, if I invoked the name of Jesus, that thing it was gone. So, have you seen that type of reaction that these entities have had? I mean, what are they if not demonic? Why would they respond that way to the name of Jesus?
Well, I mean, a lot of people do hold that view that they're sort of like a paranormal, occult, supernatural thing, and they're very sort of malevolent and evil. There's absolutely no doubt about that at all. I think most people who have the experience, in fact, I don't know of one person who's had well, actually, I do know of one story where somebody had like a positive experience with the Shadow People, but otherwise, they were totally terrifying, where the person would sort of semi-wake up in the bed in the middle of the night and be unable to move, have this, like a sense of paralysis, and this feeling of something evil and malevolent in the room watching them, and they'd be able to move their eyes and see this shadowy humanoid figure. There are all a lot of different stories about people sort of banishing them and, sending them away and so forth, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and when sometimes you have, like you said, somebody will, say the name of Christ or whatever, and then other people have done the same in other religions, that they've managed to get rid of them as well. So, but the important thing is that if you concentrate, you can very often get rid of them. And maybe that's, an important issue, that they have a weakness or a vulnerability that can be exploited. One of the theories for them as to why they turn up is the idea that they essentially are like parasites, that they live on sort of like like the human energy field or the life force. If we take the view that we have souls or like a soul energy or something like that, one of the theories is that the Shadow People are kind of like a battery that needs to be recharged, and their energy comes from essentially taking it from us. Kind of like in the Matrix movies where we're all essentially batteries for the machines.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, the idea that the Shadow People use us as fuel. In other words, they instill fear in us, and then they feed and thrive on that negative energy that they create in us in the first place.
I have to say I would agree with that idea of that they fear must be the food that they're after, because they certainly generate an awful lot of it. But if you muster up the strength and the faith to say, in the name of Jesus, I cast you out, right there you're kind of putting an end to fear and making that claim. But I'll tell you, there was one time that this guy was, this one, the last one, which was probably 2003, was the toughest one that I've ever encountered. And I had quite a number of experiences, from, I would say, mid-80s until 2003. And it wasn't like always in the same house. I mean, the thing would follow me if I went to, another state or a hotel or, someplace. It didn't seem to matter where I was. But the last one, that one mocked me. Cause, usually it was trying to strangle me. And this particular time I was trying to say Jesus, and it was mocking me through my own voice. Like I would try to do what I always did, and it was mocking me through my own voice. And then finally, and this was at a time when I was going through my divorce, I didn't really care if I died because I was kind of feeling pretty miserable anyway. So I was kind of like, you know what? Fine, just get it over with. And I was like totally not afraid, and it went away. And so it does seem to make sense that demonic, yeah, sure, it cast it out in the name of Jesus, but it does seem to feed on that fear response.
Well, yeah, I think you find a lot of these supernatural things do seem to thrive on, or their whole intent is to create fear and then sort of essentially milk it. I mean, you can find not just in sort of the shadow people, the Hat Man or the Men in Black, but sort of ghostly encounters. You can even make parallels with vampire stories. The legends of vampires coming into people's bedrooms at night and sucking their blood for food really isn't that much different to a Hat Man dressed in black coming in and essentially bleeding somebody dry of energy. So I do sometimes wonder if sort of these ancient stories of black cloak vampires, stealing into people's bedrooms in the night, are sort of a distortion of something like Hat Man reports. And I mean, if you go back even further, you have the sort of the Middle Ages era and earlier, like right back to ancient Babylonia of incubus and succubus type creatures, sort of like male and female supernatural creatures that would invade people's bedrooms and basically have sex with them to create these sort of half human, half sort of monstrous paranormal offspring. And, there are a lot of parallels with the incubus and the succubus and with the shadow people in the sense that people are unable to move. They wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, paralyzed, or they have a sense that something's coming down the corridor or coming through the bedroom door, and they're unable to do anything about it, and then this figure stands over them or straddles them, or, as I said, with the incubus and the succubus reports, has sex with them. And you can find these stories throughout history. And, there's, other than the name and a few changes, there's not really that much difference between, whether it's in the United States in 1993 or 2000, or if it's ancient Babylonia, 4,000 years ago. There's not really that much difference between any of these stories.
So do you think that the way they appear is related to the time period? Like, so they're in the 20th century, so they're kind of manifesting as a man with a suit, and centuries past been the vampire kind of royalty looking person, or what?
Yeah, I actually do believe. What I believe is that whatever this phenomenon is, it can kind of masquerade and camouflage itself according to the beliefs and sort of perceptions of that era. And I think that's why these things seem to change in terms of subtly, and sometimes not so subtly in terms of their appearances. But also the method and what the goal, that does change. It's always about putting people in situations where they become terrified, and the person literally does feel drained afterwards, as if their energy's been taken out of them. I mean, I remember one person said they felt that after being visited by this Man in Black type character, which is not dissimilar to the Hat Man, they felt like a diabetic must feel when they crash, if they've missed a couple of meals and they start to get the shakes and crash and get weak. And the witness said that's how they felt. They felt that when this Man in Black was sat opposite them, that he was literally draining their life force. Now, of course, the image of the Man in Black, that would allow them to sort of move amongst us today without being noticed too much. 500 years ago, it may have been in the form of something like a goblin or something. Not in the sense that, sort of literal winged fairies or goblins exist in the way that, fairy stories tell us, but the idea of something that could be implanted in the mind to suggest that's how they looked. And in the same way, with the incubus and the succubus, of sometimes like it was like a hideous old lady, that kind of thing. It may be that we've never really seen them in their genuine form, but they're able to take on sort of archetypal imagery of like an old hag or a man in a hat, and they use these symbols time and again to suit the period or the location.
That was what was really weird. I didn't have the derby hat guy. I didn't see very much, maybe once or twice. I remember drawing a picture of him in probably around 1985 or 86 in one of my classes. I was just doodling and I drew a picture of him. And as far as I knew, nobody else was experiencing this stuff. And then when I joined the Army in 87 and ended up getting my duty station at an Air Force base, I met a guy named Dave, and we started talking about weird stuff like this, and then he starts talking about shadow people, and I was telling him about my shadow people, and then we both kind of got quiet, like this is like the first time we ever encountered somebody that had a similar experience, and it was almost like in stereo at the same time. We were like, did you see the hat guy? It was like, it came out at like the same time. And so yeah, I mean, it's weird. It freaks me out. And when that movie Ghost came out with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, that didn't help matters much. The way they depict.
Well, actually, I don't think you've seen it. There's a film called Shadow People. It came out about 3 years ago. It's a pretty good movie, really. I mean, a fictional movie. It's a pretty good one.
Yeah, my sister told me about it, and she says, "Oh my God, you don't want to see it because it may be a little too close."
You probably don't, actually.
I like sleeping at night. Call me crazy. So okay,
but, yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
But it's a pretty good movie, then.
Okay, you make reference to when you're talking about the Men in Black. You always say the real Men in Black. What do you mean by that? Are you talking about what we're talking about, or something different?
Well, remember, most people think of the Men in Black. You know, their sort of imagery comes from the Men in Black movies with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. The idea of these guys who wear black suits and sunglasses and sometimes hats, and they work for this sort of classified government agency, or even some agency that the government doesn't even know about. It's buried so deep, it's like its own rogue agency, if you like. And because the movies are so popular, people think of the Men in Black, that's what they think of, sort of like 007 type characters silencing everybody when it comes to UFOs. But if you go back into the history of the UFO subject, the real Men in Black, which is the title of a book I wrote about this in 2011, the real Men in Black are actually very, very different. I would say a good 95, 96% of all the Men in Black reports on file describe when the people have been visited at their homes by the Men in Black. As I said, a good 95, 96, maybe even more, a higher percentage than that even, have described the Men in Black as being sort of only about 5 feet to 5 feet 5 tall, very skinny, pale to the point of looking anemic, and they often have these sort of large, bulging eyes. One witness said that they have the kind of eyes like a dog has just before it's about to bite, that kind of thing. And they don't seem very accustomed with our mannerisms and ways, and they talk strange, and they look weird. They almost look like an alien-human hybrid, but it's like as if they're trying to camouflage that by having these sort of pull-down fedora hats and wrap-around sunglasses, but you know, it doesn't hide the fact that they look weird. And, you know, as I said, super skinny and pale. So in other words, they look nothing like the movie versions. And I've actually got obviously when you write books on a particular subject, I've done 3 on the Men in Black, and people contact you with their own cases. And I've got a number of cases on file where people had visits from these creepy Men in Black, and in the immediate aftermath, they experienced violent outbreaks of poltergeist activity in the home. I've got other reports where people were visited by the Men in Black, but there was no UFO angle, but the people had been dabbling with Ouija boards, and then the Men in Black turned up. And I'm also working on a book now on Women in Black reports, and most people don't know anything about the Women in Black stories, but they're sort of not as prevalent as the Men in Black cases, but the Women in Black are very, very similar, sort of very pale, almost like one person described them as looking like overly Botoxed, you know, just weird-looking skin, just like, imagine like a baby's skin, but on a 35-year-old woman, and where her skin is like milk white as well. You know, it looks really strange. So, but I think all these things are interconnected, but, you know, as I said, the real Men in Black are extremely weird-looking and definitively sort of tied to paranormal stuff, as I said, like poltergeist activity and Ouija boards and things like that.
Do you think I don't know if this is you would know better if this is a recent phenomenon. For me, it's a recent phenomenon I hadn't heard of until maybe 5-10 years ago tops. The black-eyed kids.
Yeah.
Are they related
I think,
too?
again, I think the black-eyed children are actually part of this. And again, it could be another manifestation of the same phenomena, but appeared in a different way. I mean, for example, the black-eyed children act in very similar ways to the men in black and the women in black. That's to say, people often get a knock on the door late at night, say 11:30. Now, most people, the first thing you're going to do is obviously look through the spy hole to see who on earth's knocking on your door at 11:30 at night.
Yeah.
But people with the men in black and the women in black, it's almost as if their common sense factors have been controlled, and they let these people in and sit down, and they let them interrogate them essentially and threaten them. It's almost like they've been hypnotized to, that they've lost control of their mental common sense factors. And we get that sometimes with the black-eyed children. They knock on the doors and they find every reason to try and come in the house. But, they need to use the phone, or can they have some money or some food. But they never force their way in. They wait to be invited. And, of course, most people, when they see the black eyes, the last thing they want to do is invite them in their house. They just want to shut the door.
Yeah.
The same with the men in black. They never force their way in. They wait to be invited. And, of course, that parallels the old vampire legends where the first time a vampire visits your house, it has to be invited in the first time. So, again, I wonder if some of these legends of, vampires with fangs and sucking blood and so on could be distortions of or an incarnation of what we see today. But the other thing, obviously, that's similar with the men in black and the black-eyed children is that both categories have very pale skin. They obviously dress in black. They turn up at night trying to find a way to get into the house. And, of course, in the same way that the hat man has a hat, the men in black have the fedoras, or the black-eyed kids have black hoodies.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of deep parallels when you look at it, and I think they are supernatural in origin, and I think they're all a manifestation of one essential thing that possibly can sort of alter its appearance or camouflage itself.
So they went from kind of an aristocrat look to a 1950s business look to hip hop.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in one, it sounds kind of amusing, but on the other hand, I mean, the thing with the men in black, the fedora hats and whatever, people would look twice if they saw somebody walking on the street like that today, But in other words, they very often appear in a way that allows them to blend in quite smoothly. For example, the Men in Black reports are really at their height in the 50s and the 60s. Mm-hmm. They started in the 40s in a trickle, and I still get a lot of reports today, but certainly nowhere near as many reports as researchers would get back in the 50s and 60s. Now, of course, in that period, most of the guys did wear suits and did wear hats to work, fedoras, those kind of hats. It was what all the guys wore. Then sort of 70s onwards, that kind of trailed off. So if you were some sort of paranormal entity or force and you wanted to kind of have the same effect and, infiltrate us, etc., you would obviously need to upgrade the way you appear to suit the times. And then one of the theories is that maybe they don't actually, physically wear these clothes. It could be sort of almost like a mirage or an image that's projected into our minds that, that we think we're seeing these things on the doorstep. It may actually be like a projection, like a hypnotic projection, as a way to allow some sort of entity in that has no physical form. It creates like a physical image for our benefit, but it may have sort of actually no physical properties. It could be like an intelligent, malevolent energy or something like that.
Has anybody reported having physical contact, as in like actually touching them to see if they have mass?
Very occasionally, and they've said they have, but again the big question is it like is it actually happening, or is it like a really sophisticated kind of hologram type dreamlike state. You know, kind of going back to the Matrix, where people like Keanu Reeves' character, you know, thinks he's in the real world when he's actually in this tank of liquid, you know, feeding the machine. It's like he goes to work every day, etc., but it's not real. So in other words, one of the theories is perhaps some of these cases are projections of a really advanced simulation.
Okay. All right, hold that thought.
And you're actually like, what's that?
I said hold that thought. We are getting ready to go to break right now, and we'll come back in the last half hour and kind of talk some more about this same stuff. We're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project for the final half-hour segment here. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight we're talking with Nick Redfern. Nick, how are, or are they, maybe I don't know if they are or not, how are the Men in Black affiliated with NASA?
Well, there's sort of like two categories of what people would call Men in Black. There's the ones where 95, as I said, 95, 96, maybe even more percent of this sort of weird paranormal aspect. But then there is a very small percentage that do sort of mirror the whole angle of the movie versions, where, you know, there are sort of classified hidden groups that possibly operate outside of even, you know, congressional oversight and that kind of thing. That even the government itself doesn't know about them, but they're sort of the ones who really keep tabs on the UFO subject. And there are some stories about, like within NASA, or sort of classified space programs that even NASA itself may not know about, where there are stories of people sort of being threatened by guys in black suits. Now, one of the things I think, ironically, what might have happened is that some of these agencies, these sort of unacknowledged agencies, as I said, the ones that aren't sort of subject to congressional oversight, and that possibly even, as I said, the government and the various known agencies don't know anything about them. I think what they may do is possibly they may exploit the legends of the real Men in Black stories and actually sort of put on the black suits and the hats if they want to threaten people, because it acts as a good camouflage, as a cover. You know, if the witness talks about it, people just say, well, you've been watching too many Men in Black movies, you know. So in other words, it gets a little bit complicated in the sense that we have these creepy, weird, real Men in Black, and then somebody may well have thought, well, hang on, we don't know what these things are, but we can actually exploit the legend to our own ends and as a means to keep witnesses quiet. So that's what gets it sort of really complicated. There could be actually more than one kind of Man in Black sort of roaming around silencing people.
Capitalizing on the urban legends. So
yeah, exactly.
You in the bio there, I referenced the NASA conspiracies. What are you talking about there?
Well, that was a book I wrote in 2010, and it deals with all the sort of various theories of cover-up and things like this that have been made in relation to NASA. I mean, one of the most fascinating things that I found when I was doing the research was how when the Challenger space shuttle, exploded in January 1986, a big investigation was launched by the FBI or or claiming, I should say, that the shuttle had been sabotaged. And now, as far as we know, it wasn't, but the FBI launched, as I said, an intensive investigation because these were stories were coming in from all across the United States. Actually, one story right from here in the heart of Dallas. A guy contacted the Dallas FBI office to say that he worked in the video industry, and he said that he thought he'd seen something that looked like a small object hit the huge fuel tank and ignite it. And so, in other words, you know, the conspiracy here was that, or the theory was at least, that it was like the work of terrorists or something like that, rather than a tragic accident. And so a lot of the things I cover aren't sort of UFO conspiracies. It's like where, you know, there's like a little known one. Most people don't even know that. And the FBI have now actually released their file through the Freedom of Information Act on their investigations of the Challenger explosion. It's sort of fascinating and a weird story of, you know, how there were these different theories that it wasn't a tragic accident. And I also talk about other ones in the book, like, for example, the Face on Mars controversy, this huge formation. There's some people who think that there could have been sort of like clandestine manned missions to Mars to actually check it all out, you know, missions we don't know anything about. Of course, that gets into really controversial areas when you start talking about, like, an alternative space program that runs alongside NASA's program, and possibly a program that NASA knows nothing about. That's sort of the theory, is that NASA has legitimately gone to the moon, but maybe with advanced technologies, somebody else has a far more covert space program, and they've checked out things like this, you know, this controversial face on Mars. So there's a lot of weird stuff surrounding outer space and conspiracies and things like that.
Yeah, when it comes to conspiracies regarding NASA, personally, if we did go to the moon, I don't believe we went the way they showed us on TV. I tend to really not accept the footage that we were shown. But I was watching that Netflix special that I saw you on, Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Exposed, and there's that whole other side of it where supposedly they found all kinds of really weird stuff on the moon: antennas, dishes, bridges, you know, bases, covered domes that have been caved in. Yeah, what's your view on all of that? First of all, do you think we actually went to the moon? And if so, what do you think the deal is with all that weird stuff?
Yeah, I do think, I don't believe the moon landings were hoaxed at all. I really do believe we went to the moon. But there's no doubt that, I mean, a lot of the pictures that have been come back from the moon do seem to show genuinely weird looking formations and structures that, when you look at them, it's hard to deny that they look like they've been created by something with intelligence. They're not just sort of random rocks lying here and there. And what's important is that the reason why we have these photographs is because, you know, NASA has put them in the public domain. But unless somebody's willing to take the time to go through literally thousands and thousands and thousands of images, you wouldn't even know they existed, you know. And to their credit, a couple of people actually done that, and that's how we've got these photographs that seem to show like spires and, in some cases, what look like factories and generating plants and things like that. And of course, that's given rise to two particular theories. One, the idea that there could be extraterrestrials, you know, have outposts on the moon, or could it be evidence of some sort of secret space program from right here on Earth, and we're responsible for building these sort of bases and outposts and technologies? Or could it be a combination of the two? But I mean, I know some people might find that sort of controversial, but I would urge people to look at the images, because you can find a lot of them online. And, you know, it's like a lot of these pictures coming back from Mars now with weird things in the pictures. Again, with some of those, it's hard to deny the idea that, you know, they're just random rocks or whatever.
Yeah. I took some screen captures from that documentary of Buzz Aldrin. I mean, what the heck? Did you ever get to meet him?
No, I've never met him, no.
He's got like all these weird pins on his jacket and strange rings and like a crystal bracelet, and I mean, it's like, what is it? Did you see that? What he was wearing in that documentary?
No, I honestly don't remember now what he was wearing, no.
Well, I posted on my Facebook. Maybe you can check it out later. I'm like, either this guy's really just eccentric and strange, or he's trying to send a message here, or I don't know. It just kind of seems weird to me. They addressed something else in that documentary that I've always been intrigued by, and that's the whole possibility of an Apollo 20 supposedly finding a woman or women, depending how they look at that. What's your take on Apollo 20 and that female that they supposedly found?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of stories like this. Basically, for people unaware of it, it sort of focuses on the idea of like covert missions back to the moon that followed on from the original Apollo missions from 69 to 72. And there is footage, controversial footage, pictures of what is supposedly like a dead alien that the astronauts found. You know, I mean, if there have been covert missions to the moon, whether by, you know, an acknowledged agency or some super secret agency, I actually wouldn't be surprised if that has happened. You know, I wouldn't fall down in a dead faint, I would think. You know, I mean, but the reason I say that is because, you know, we went to the moon, 69 to 72, and then there were going to be all these plans for building like outposts and installations on the moon, and then it would be like a staging point for manned missions to Mars from the moon. But then it all came to a crashing halt, and, you know, we're actually further back now than we were then. It's like if we want to send out, you know, there actually isn't like a US manned space program anymore. You know, the US wants to send astronauts into space. Basically, they've got to ask the Russians, you know, to hitch a ride on one of their craft. You know, the space shuttle's retired. We have no way to put, you know, US astronauts into space. There is no space shuttle anymore. And to me, it kind of seems strange that with every other aspect of technology, whether it's like the internet, computers, weapons, everything's massively advancing. But it's like we're led to believe that the space program is actually going in reverse, essentially. So that's why I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else is, you know, sort of running a far more covert program, and possibly the whole Apollo 20 thing could be an example of that. You know, the idea of secret missions going back and taking their time to find things when the world's TV cameras aren't following their every move, you know, like they did with the known missions.
Okay. What about the Roswell slides controversy? What's that?
Well, this goes back about 18 months when it was actually just first started to surface very quietly, but it certainly picked up in the last couple of months. Basically revolves around a couple of slides that have surfaced that appear to date from the 1940s, showing a strange body laid out in some sort of, what looks like some sort of glass container, that looks sort of very small, spindly, and alien-like in appearance, or as we're sort of led to believe aliens look. And the slides were actually found in a garage sale in Arizona, or actually I should say like a property sale, and they actually trace back to a couple, Hilda and Bernard Ray, and they had some interesting links with powerful figures, and Bernard Ray in his job was stationed at one point near Roswell in the time frame of the Roswell crash, and so the theory is that possibly they were exposed in some fashion to one of the bodies and were able to sort of surreptitiously, if you like, take some photographs, which have now surfaced, and you're going to see pictures of the internet, sort of second or third generation blurry ones, but they're apparently going to be unveiled in Mexico in a big event on May the 5th. where, as far as I know, all the information that is currently withheld or hasn't been released will be released. Now, of course, like any aspect of ufology, when you've got talk about pictures and dead aliens and photographs, there are people who think it's just, there's just nothing to it. It's just a hoax. Other people have suggested it could be like a mummified child, something like that, or a sort of badly deformed person, or an alien. And I don't actually think there's much debate as to the fact that the slides do seem to date from the late 40s. That itself is, pretty much on target. So that in itself is intriguing. But I'm hoping that when the slides surface, we're going to get sort of like a full accounting of what happened, and all the data will be released. Because one of the reasons why there's so much controversy surrounding these slides right now is because you can see, as I said, second or third generation images of the slides online, but we're not being told too much about them. So inevitably, this is provoking controversy and speculation, which I don't know if the events of May the 5th in Mexico will actually make things clearer or more controversial. But I mean, it's certainly one of the more interesting developments in the UFO subject right now.
Wow, just about 2 weeks away, a week and a half, something like that. That's supposed to...
it's about 2 weeks, something like that. And there's going to be, I'm not sure if it's going to be like streamed on the internet or not. I can't remember, but I'm sure it'll be all over the internet, within minutes of the event taking place. And I know lots of people are looking into the slides from different angles as to what they show, and some people are sort of just focusing, researching on the couple who reportedly had the photographs. So a lot of work's being done. It's just, to what extent 70 years later it can be resolved or not, or has the trail gone so cold that all we've got is the pictures and nothing to sort of to back it up, you know what I mean? I'm just not sure where it's all going to end up, really.
Yeah. Well, you've got a new book coming out next month as well in May, right? Secret History?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's called Secret History, and it's basically split into 3 sections. The first section deals with like the whole ancient astronaut scenarios and theories. Then the second section deals with historical mysteries like who was Jack the Ripper and did Hitler survive the Second World War, that kind of thing. And then the third section has more up-to-date mysteries like Roswell and what goes on at Area 51 and things like that. So it's sort of like an alternative look at mankind's history, throughout the ages, that sort of thing.
Okay, so did Hitler survive? Did he go to Antarctica or Argentina or what? What's your take on it?
Well, all the evidence and the common sense and my view is that he did commit suicide in Germany, when the war came to a close. However, if you read the files that are surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI, for example, have an extensive file that, again, they've declassified now, that addressed all the different theories that Hitler survived the war. And there actually were some really interesting stories where the FBI were told about how he'd supposedly taken like a classified journey to South America in a Nazi submarine and been secretly given new identity in South America, and they investigated the FBI investigated these rumors very, very closely and seriously. They didn't write them off. They dug into them deeply. They didn't find proof, but the mere fact that they took the story seriously is interesting. And some people in the files were absolutely adamant. They were saying, we know he survived. So it's one of those things that's still wide open, I think.
Yeah, and then was in the 70s reports or whatnot of the Boys from Brazil. That movie came out.
Yeah.
What's
that kind of added to it. But I mean, obviously, even if he did survive the war, there's no way he'd be alive now. He was born in the late 1800s, 1890 something. He'd be like 115 120 now. But
yeah, wasn't the
I mean, I
the boys from Brazil were supposedly like clones of Hitler?
Yeah, that's right. They were making sort of clones of leading Nazis and that kind of thing, which I guess that's the sort of thing the Nazis would want to do, you know, sort of bring back the so-called master race, as they called it. But you know, they weren't that masterful of a race if they lost the war. So.
All right. So with all the research you've done and what, 2 decades now,
yeah.
What has intrigued you the most? What's your sweet spot?
Well, actually, one of them would be the Men in Black mystery. I mean, as I said, I've written 3 books on the subject, doing one on the women in black, and, you know, I still get a lot of stories from people who've had these sort of creepy encounters. And the other one, I've been on a lot of expeditions to Puerto Rico looking for the so-called Chupacabra. You know, we get a lot of these stories from here in Texas, as I'm sure you know, but the original Chupacabra reports kicked off in Puerto Rico in the 90s, and as I said, I've been on a lot of road trip style expeditions to the El Yunque rainforest on Puerto Rico and interviewing local people, ranchers, police officers, veterinarians. All have had some sort of role in this subject, and I've been to Puerto Rico many times now, from 2004 up until 2013 was the last time I went, and it's sort of, you know, a fascinating, weird mystery of this strange creature that can reportedly sort of drain animals of blood and feeds on blood, etc. So that's one of my other big interests as well is the Chupacabra.
So with all these various cryptozoological entities and creatures and whatnot, you've obviously interviewed and gotten lots of reports from people, but have you seen anything firsthand?
Well, the closest I've sort of come to seeing something firsthand is finding, for example, like, you know, Bigfoot tracks and prints in the woods, that kind of thing. Or hearing what are called tree knocks. For people who aren't aware of it, where people see Bigfoot, they often hear these sort of tree knocks, as if these creatures signal each other. You know, like very loud banging on trees in the middle of nowhere in the woods, you know, 30 miles from civilization or whatever, and people are looking for these creatures, and suddenly there's like this strange grunting or whatever, and then these knockings on trees as if they're using like a large piece of wood to hit the tree trunk. So, you know, when you hear things like that, which I actually have, and you come across tracks and you get plaster casts of footprints, then it really does make you think, wow, you know, what if these things really are sort of within 20 feet of us? They blend in, you know, animals are good at hiding and blending in, and we don't see them. We go blundering around and not realizing what's just, you know, out of view. So that does really kind of make you think, wow, maybe something is here, and I haven't seen it. Maybe it is just in, you know, sort of stone throwing distance. Who knows?
How weird would that be, huh? You're out.
Well, it would be kind of cool, but
better have your camera
ready. Well, that's right. I never go anywhere without a camera. But, I guess the thing is, though, of course, you never know how you would react if you were confronted with like an 8-foot tall ape. You know, it's like you might just stand there staring at it, totally forgetting you've got your camera. You know, it's kind of when somebody sees a car accident, you know, a violent car accident. They don't always react the way they should. You know, the police ask, what did you see? And they can't remember. You know, their mind's in a whirl, or they just stand there staring instead of thinking to call 911. You know, the things that you would expect yourself to do, where you sit and calmly, rationally think about it, often go totally out the window when you're placed into that sort of sudden, stressful situation. So I might just sort of stand there staring at it, and then it lumbers off, and then I think, oh no, I forgot to get the camera out.
That's why you need to mount a GoPro on auto on your head.
Yeah, exactly.
No way it's just running when you're looking at it. So,
yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I mean, why not? The GoPro has about as many accessories as you can imagine.
Yep.
We got about 3 minutes left. How can people get a hold of your materials, get a hold of you, check out all the stuff you have?
Well, I have a blog called World of Whatever, and the address is Nick Redfern 40, which is FORTEAN, nickredfern40.blogspot.com. Or if they type my name into Facebook, they can reach me there as well. And I also have an Amazon page where people can find out about the books. And I'm also on Twitter as well, so there's plenty of ways if people want to share information, or if they've got questions and, they're looking for help on something. I'm always, happy to sort of do my best to answer questions or, give advice, that kind of thing. So. And
you're always on the job, so to speak, so if somebody has a report of something weird or freaky, they can contact you and let you know about it?
Yeah, and if it's something that, I'm not personally fully aware of or I've ever investigated, generally there's somebody I can refer them to who can help them, and I've always sort of got a few lectures going on. I'm speaking on the first weekend in May at the Ohio Creature Conference in Ohio. I'll be speaking about my cryptozoology investigations, and the following weekend I'll be at the for the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network group in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona. I'll be speaking for them. And then at the end of the month, I'll be at Joshua Tree, California, speaking last weekend of the month at called the Contact in the Desert Conference. That's the last weekend in May. Then the first weekend in June, I'll be at the Ohio MUFON conference. So I've got quite a packed schedule over the next 5 or 6 weeks, really. But I enjoy that. I enjoy sort of conferences, traveling, and hanging out with everybody. It's it's cool to do. So.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have videos also, or just the books?
No, I don't have video. Mainly just the books, and some of the books. They're all available in paper copy and Kindle. Some of them are on audio as well, and so people can pick them up that way. So.
Okay, well, wonderful. We got about 30 seconds left, so that's probably about it. But hey, man, great talking with you again. It's been about a year, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot, Rob.
Yeah, man. Let's not be strangers. I'd love to talk to you some more.
No, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project tonight, and we'll see you next Wednesday night, maybe at 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm getting ready to do some traveling myself, so we shall see. But have a good night, everybody.